There are four basic tenets of Holland's theory. The first is that personality of an individual can be described as a three-letter combination in descending order of the three types shown here. The second statement says that work environments, or occupations, can also be described in three letters in descending order based on the predominance of the three types in those occupations. The third statement indicates that people of a given type are attracted to work environments or occupations of the same or similar type as their own. And finally, to the extent that individuals can find an environment that matches their type, job satisfaction can be predicted. Let's look at the types now and see what characterizes each. A person of a realistic type has manual skills and enjoys working with his or her hands using tools and equipment. This type of person finds satisfaction in seeing something built or repaired, some tangible task completed. A person of this type is also likely to be practical-minded and down-to-earth. A person of the investigative type likes to work with his or her mind, to do abstract thinking and solve problems. Persons of this type typically have good knowledge and skill in science and math and often enter occupations in science, engineering, or medicine. A person of the artistic type has knowledge and skill in some art form and enjoys being creative with words, music, acting, dancing, or other artistic areas. Such people are high on creativity and value freedom from structure and routine. A person of the social type likes to work with people face-to-face for the purpose of teaching, counseling, meeting physical needs, or performing other activities that contribute to a person's well-being. A person of the enterprising type also likes to work with people, but with a different motive. Enterprising types like to lead or manage people, and they use their interpersonal skills to sell products, services, or ideas. A person of the conventional type has interest in supporting the smooth functioning of a business or any other type of operation through the use of clerical, arithmetic, or organizational skills. Here's Dr. Raymond again, talking about common terminology related to Holland's theory.
Well, congruence is a term that when we use it with the Holland theory tells us the degree to which a personality code, which is generated by having taken one of the Holland assessment devices, the vocational preference inventory or the self-directed search, or for that matter, it could be the Strong because the Holland codes are embedded in the Strong now. But it tells us the degree to which the personality code matches the environment code for someone. It can also be used to compare the codes of two different people. Any two Holland codes can be compared, and if they're very similar, if the top code, for example, is artistic and the second is investigative and the third is conventional, so in other words, if I have a personality code of AIE and I have an environment code of AIE, that's sort of perfect congruence. So that's what we're looking for, is a good person-environment fit generally. But we can also use the term congruence to talk about the degree to which any two Holland codes are similar. Could be two different people, how similar are they in terms of their Holland code, two different work environments, a work environment and a personality code. So it's a very useful term, I think, and is quite helpful in interpreting the Holland theory. Consistency has to do with there are certain kinds of personality characteristics that go together. For example, it's much more common to have a realistic person with also some strong investigative personality characteristics. So if you look at the Holland hexagon, those personalities that are adjacent to each other on the hexagon are most similar to each other, and those that are farthest apart are least similar to each other. So a consistent personality would be someone who has a primary personality characteristic, let's say realistic, and the secondary personality characteristic is adjacent to it. So in that case, it would be investigative or conventional. And that would be a consistent personality. An inconsistent personality, a good example would be someone who is very high on artistic and conventional. And just common sense tells us people who are, some of the characteristics of a conventional person are You know, they're very much a place for everything, everything in its place. They care about appearances, they care about rules, so on and so forth. Most of us recognize, an accountant would be a good example, or a clerical staff member would be a good example of that. Artistic people tend not to be that way. They tend not to think that way. Appearance tends not to be important to them. In fact, they kind of rebel against order wherever they see it, oftentimes. I mean, there are always exceptions to these rules. But a very inconsistent personality type would be somebody who's very high on artistic and also high on conventional. I mean, frankly, there aren't very many people in society who have that particular odd, inconsistent Holland code, but some do exist. And where they do exist, these people have a little bit more difficulty generally finding employment that's appropriate to them, because in the work environment there aren't very many you know, very, very organized and together and rule-oriented artists in the world. I mean, it just doesn't really happen much in the real world. And similarly, the same could be said about, for example, investigative people, which would be the opposite of entrepreneurial people. The investigative people tend to think the brilliant ideas and answer the why questions, but they like to kind of do it in isolation, and they almost never make money doing what they do. The entrepreneurial people don't have the brilliant ideas, but the one thing they see is how they can take a brilliant idea and make money with it and create wealth with it, frankly. And we need both kinds of people. I don't intend to attach valences to them, but that it gives you an idea. That would be a very inconsistent person also, someone who is both investigative and entrepreneurial. Those don't happen in the same package very often either, but they do some. So that's a kind of a brief description of what we mean by consistency. When we're talking about the Holland theory, what we mean when we talk about differentiation is really how sort of spiky the person's profile is. So for example, you might give an individual the self-directed search, and they might have elevated scores on realistic, investigative, artistic, and social. So a high, flat profile. That would be undifferentiated. I mean, we can't tell whether they're really investigative or really realistic or really artistic or what they are. And so it's a very difficult thing to interpret. On the other hand, if we have a client who's very high on realistic and then the other scores are quite low, it gives us a much clearer picture of who that person is. Their scores are very well differentiated and their personality characteristics are very well differentiated. So a person with one score that's very high and the rest are quite low tends to be a little bit easier to work with because they probably have pretty strong feelings about who they are and about the work environment that they'd like to work in. But somebody who has either a very high flat profile or a very low flat profile is frankly, the low flat profile is almost the most difficult thing to do. People with high flat profiles usually have had positive experiences in life, and a lot of the things they've tried, they've been pretty successful at, and so they're prone to try new things, and eventually they tend to find something that works for them. But people with low flat profiles tend to be reluctant to try new things because a lot of the things they've tried they don't like or they're not successful at. And they tend to be some of our most difficult clinical challenges, I think.